The first snow had fallen thick as wool, blurring the ridges and fences until the whole of Ash Hollow looked like a town half remembered in a dream. The air held that solemn hush before evening, when even horses seemed to exhale slower, their breath blooming in ghostly clouds. From the white horizon came the creak of wagon wheels, a lonely sound that carried far across the frozen land. Inside the wagon sat a woman wrapped in a threadbare coat and a little girl whose blue eyes caught every drift like it was a miracle. Clara Wren tightened the scarf around her daughter's neck. The child, Lila, pointed to a sign half buried in snow. Ash Hollow. Pop 312. Clara smiled faintly, though her heart ached. A new start, she told herself. Again. When they rolled into town, faces peeked through frosted windows. A widow and a mute child arriving in the dead of winter. There was always a story waiting to be told about that. The blacksmith paused mid-swing, the baker's wife whispered to the woman beside her. Even the crows seemed to turn their heads. Clara felt the weight of every gaze settle on her shoulders. She paid the stable hand what little coin she had left and lifted Lila down into the snow. The girl's boots sank deep. She giggled silently, her laughter only visible in the sparkle of her eyes. Across the street, a man watched them from beside a bay horse. He was broad-shouldered, wrapped in a heavy duster the color of smoke, his hat rimmed with frost. His stillness drew the eye more than motion ever could. When Lila's doll fell from her mittened hands into the slush, the man stepped forward without a word. He bent, lifted the doll with surprising gentleness, brushed the snow away, and handed it back. "Thank you," Clara said softly. The man only nodded once, the ghost of a smile passing over his face. Then he turned, the leather of his coat whispering, and led his horse away down the lane. Someone nearby muttered, "That's Thorne, Elias Thorne, best steer wrangler in the territory, cursed all the same." By the time Clara turned back, the man was gone. The doll was still warm from his glove. That night, they rented a small room above the milliner's shop. The wind moaned through the shutters like some tired spirit. Clara brushed Lila's hair by the dim lamplight and whispered, "Tomorrow we'll visit the schoolhouse. Maybe they'll have need of a teacher." The girl nodded, wrote something on her small slate, and turned it to her mother. "I like the cowboy." Clara's smile faltered. "We don't even know him, darling," he smiled. Lila scribbled, underlining it. "Smiles don't lie." Clara touched the chalk-smeared fingers and kissed them. "Sometimes they do," she murmured. Morning came sharp and brittle. Frost feathered the glass, the kind that turns the world outside into a pale mystery. The schoolhouse sat on the edge of town, a lonely shape against the hills. The board inside was cracked, the stove weak. But when Clara stood before the children, chalk trembling in her hand, she felt a tremor of purpose. Her voice carried softly but surely, like someone coaxing light into a dim room. By week's end, word had spread. The new teacher was a widow, the child mute. May Harlow at the general store began each gossip with, "Bless her heart," and ended with something that didn't sound like blessing at all. Yet Clara smiled through it, the way a candle endures drafts. One afternoon, as she locked the schoolhouse, she noticed fresh nails hammered into the warped roof beam. The storm 2 nights ago had blown part of it loose. She hadn't told anyone. Beneath the patchwork repair lay a small, worn hammer. Her breath caught. She stepped outside and saw in the far distance a rider just cresting the hill. A dark figure against the fading light. He didn't look back, but she knew who it was. Elias Thorne. Winter deepened its grip. The days shortened. The nights grew long enough to think too much. Lila's slate filled with drawings of horses and wide skies, of a man standing by a fence with snow on his hat. Clara said nothing, though each sketch pricked something tender inside her. The town, as towns do, began to talk louder. The widow was grateful for attention, they said. The cowboy had his eye on her. Sheriff Amos Greeley stopped by one evening, hat in hand, pretending it was official business. "Miss Wren," he said, "folks here are friendly but traditional. Might do you good to keep distance from Thorne. Bad history follows him." Clara stood in her doorway, candlelight behind her, casting her face in golden shadow. "Bad history follows all of us, Sheriff. Some just carry it where folks can see." His jaw tightened. "He's dangerous. I think he's lonely." The sheriff tipped his hat stiffly and left. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and soundless. Clara leaned against the door and felt her pulse in her throat. She didn't know whether it was fear or pity she felt, for Elias or for herself. Days later, A church market filled the town square, all flickering lanterns and children's laughter. Lila clung to her mother's hand, her slate tucked under her arm. The scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Clara was speaking with May Harlow when Lila slipped away, drawn to a shadow at the edge of the crowd. Elias Thorne stood there, apart as always, snow gathering on his hat brim. His eyes met Lila's, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to hush. She stepped closer, tugged gently at his coat. Then she lifted her slate and wrote carefully in her neat, crooked letters, "You need a wife, and I need a dad." He stared as if struck. Around them, conversation stilled. The band stopped mid-song. Even the wind paused, curious. Clara saw it happen and hurried through the crowd, cheeks burning with humiliation. "Lila, I'm so sorry, Mr. Thorne. She's just—" But Elias knelt down so his eyes met the girl's. There was a softness there that hadn't been seen in years, maybe decades. He reached out, hesitant, and placed his rough hand over his heart. Then just as gently over hers, no one spoke. Clara's voice trembled. "Come, Lila." The girl obeyed, though her eyes lingered on the man who'd understood her silence. Elias stood slowly, watching them disappear into the falling snow. Around him, whispers began like dry leaves stirring in wind. "Did you see that? Poor thing, doesn't she know his curse? Girls got no father, and thorns no right being near them." Elias turned away before he could hear more. The sound of his boots crunching through snow was the only answer he gave. That night, Clara sat by the dim fire, her hands trembling around a cup of tea gone cold. Lila slept nearby, her doll pressed against her chest. Clara's eyes kept straying to the window, to the storm outside, wondering if the man was out there somewhere, braving the cold alone again. In another part of town, Elias sat by his dying hearth, the room heavy with the scent of smoke and pine sap. He stared into the flames as if they were a mirror. Her child's words echoed in his head, soft but sharp. "You need a wife, and I need a dad." He laughed once bitterly. "What do I know about families anymore?" he murmured. The fire cracked, throwing light across the framed photograph of two brothers on horseback, one long gone to the snow. The night deepened, and with it a strange warmth spread through the story, like a spark buried beneath ashes. Something had shifted, subtle but irreversible. The next morning, Clara found her doorstep swept clean of snow. No footprints led away, only a single sprig of evergreen laid beside the door. She stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. It smelled of resin and rain, of the mountains beyond town, of him. She placed it in a cup of water by the window. Outside, the wind had stilled and the world seemed briefly at peace. Yet in that quiet beneath the hush of winter, both Clara and Elias felt the same thing. A pulse, faint but certain, like the first thaw beneath the ice. The snow outside continued to fall, blanketing the tracks, softening every edge. But somewhere beneath it all, two hearts, one weary, one still learning to hope, had begun to stir, and though neither could name it yet, something fragile had been born in that cold town of whispers, something that would not easily die. The storm returned in early February, sliding over the plains like a gray veil. The sky hung low, swollen with snow. At dawn, Clara stood by the window watching the white world swallow the fence line, her hands tight around her shawl. Lila sat at the table, tracing letters on her slate. He didn't come again. The words looked small and lonely. Elias Thorne had not been seen for nearly 2 weeks. His absence filled the town like a rumor left unfinished. The gossip said his ranch was crumbling, that he'd gone mad with regret, that the blizzard would take him like it took his brother. Clara told herself it was none of her concern, but she found her gaze drifting toward the distant ridge every time the wind changed. That evening, as the fire burned low, a soft thump came at the door. When she opened it, snow rushed in like breath. There was no one outside, only a wagon piled high with split firewood. A lantern hung from the side, its flame swaying in the wind. She stepped onto the porch, calling into the night, "Mr. Thorne?" The only answer was the slow creak of wood under snow. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. He'd known. Somehow he'd known she was running out of fuel. She stood there until the cold bit through her shoes, until she felt foolish for hoping he might still be near. Then she whispered to the empty field, "Thank you," and closed the door. The next morning, Lila drew him again, his broad frame beside a wagon of wood, smoke curling from a pipe. Beneath it, she wrote one word in chalk: kind. Clara traced the word with her finger, her eyes stinging. Yes, she said. He is. The following week, the town's talk took an uglier turn. Sheriff Amos arrived at the schoolhouse just as the children were leaving. He leaned against the doorframe, his breath sour with coffee. Heard Thorne's been paying visits, he said. Mighty generous for a man who once left his own brother to die in the snow. Clara froze, chalk in hand. You believe every story this town whispers, Sheriff? He smiled, slow and mean. Only the ones that sound true. You've got a child to think of. Folks won't take kindly to seeing you tangled up with a man like him. Her throat burned. You can't scare me with gossip. He tipped his hat, that grin never leaving. Don't need to. Gossip's already done the work. That night, Clara found the courage to write Elias a note. She told him the town was cruel, that she didn't care what they said. She thanked him for the wood, for the mended roof, for the small mercies that had made winter bearable. She tucked the letter into her coat, intending to deliver it at dawn. But dawn came with news that made her blood run cold. A ranch hand stumbled into town half frozen, saying Thorne's barn had caved under the snow. His horse was down and no one knew if he'd survived. Clara didn't think. She grabbed her cloak and ran, Lila chasing after her. The wind slashed their faces, snow cutting like salt. The world was all white and howl. At last, the outline of the Thorne ranch rose through the haze, a house hunched against the storm, half swallowed by drifts. Clara pushed open the barn door and gasped. Elias was there, kneeling beside a fallen beam, his hands raw and bleeding as he tried to free a trapped horse. His breath came in ragged bursts. Go back, he rasped, not even looking up. She dropped to her knees beside him. You'll freeze. Solhi, Elias said. His voice broke on the word. Not again. I won't lose another. Together, they heaved against the beam until it shifted, just enough for the animal to scramble free. Then Elias slumped forward, his strength spent. Clara caught him before he fell, his head heavy against her shoulder. His skin was ice. Come inside, she said. He didn't resist. By the time she got him to the house, his lips were blue, his hands stiff as wood. Lila built a fire while Clara rubbed warmth back into him, whispering prayers she hadn't said in years. When he finally stirred hours later, she was still beside him, eyes red from worry. I thought you'd gone, she said. Elias blinked at the ceiling. Would've if not for her. His gaze flicked toward Lila, asleep by the hearth. She reminds me what it looks like to keep believing. Clara smiled faintly, tears slipping down her cheek. You shouldn't have been out there alone. Been alone most of my life. He turned his head, his voice a gravel whisper. My brother died in a storm just like this. Folks say it was my fault. They're not wrong. She shook her head. No one owns the weather. I led him out there. Thought I could beat the blizzard. His jaw clenched. Been trying to make up for it ever since. Every nail, every fence post. But some debts don't get paid. Clara touched his hand, tracing the scars. Maybe it's not payment you're after. Maybe it's peace. Something in him eased at that. He stared at her hand covering his, the quiet between them deep as snow. When dawn came, the storm had passed. But the town hadn't slept. By sunrise, word had spread that the widow and the cowboy had spent the night together. May Harlow said it first, and everyone else repeated it until it became truth. When Clara reached the schoolhouse that morning, she found the door chained shut. A sign hung there, closed by order of Sheriff Amos Greeley. She stood before it, heart hammering, the whole town watching from behind curtains and corners. Then she turned, walked down the middle of Main Street until she reached the sheriff's office. He looked up from his desk as she entered, surprise flickering across his face. You can't bar me from teaching, she said. He leaned back in his chair, all smug politeness. It's for the children's good. Reputation matters. Clara stepped closer, her voice low but steady. You think shame keeps this town decent? It just keeps everyone afraid. Before he could answer, the door opened behind her. Elias stood there, tall and still, the morning light carving him in silver. Every conversation on the boardwalk outside fell silent. He took off his hat, eyes fixed on the sheriff. If this town needs a villain, he said quietly, I'll be that. But I won't let you punish her for kindness. The sheriff's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. The silence stretched until Clara took Elias's hand. Not out of defiance, but simple truth. Then she walked out beside him, chin high. That night the blizzard returned, fiercer, unrelenting. The wind howled against the windows, a beast with no mercy. Then came the news. One of the school children had gone missing on the way home. Panic rippled through the town. Lanterns flickered to life. Voices shouted into the storm. Elias was already saddling his horse when Clara found him. "You can't go out there again," she cried. He met her eyes. "If I don't and something happens, I'll never forgive myself." She wanted to argue, but the look in his face stopped her. "Then I'm coming too," he shook his head. "Someone has to wait by the fire. For when we come back." And before she could speak again, he was gone, disappearing into the white roar. Hours passed. The town waited, huddled in the church hall, listening to the storm rage. Then near dawn, a shape appeared through the curtain of snow. Clara ran outside, skirts whipping around her legs. Elias staggered toward her, half carrying the missing boy in his arms. Both were covered in frost, but alive. He lowered the child gently into her arms, his own breath shallow. "Found him by the creek," he murmured. "Didn't want him to die scared." Then his knees buckled. She caught him, her tears freezing on her cheeks. "Stay with me," she begged. He smiled faintly. "Guess the curse broke after all." She dragged him inside, wrapped him in blankets, pressed his hands between hers until warmth returned. Lila sat close, her eyes wide with worry. When Elias opened his eyes again, the firelight caught the hint of a smile. "You came back," Clara whispered. "Didn't have far to go," he breathed. "My heart's been here all along." By the time spring crept over the hills, the town had changed. People who once whispered now nodded when they passed. May Harlow brought bread without a word. The sheriff kept his distance. The world somehow had softened. Elias walked with a slight limp, but there was a calmness in him now, as though the years of frost had finally begun to thaw. He built a new fence around the schoolyard, repaired its roof, planted a row of saplings along the path. On the first day of reopening, Clara rang the bell herself. The children cheered, snow melting into muddy puddles beneath their boots. Lila stood by the gate, her slate clean for once, her cheeks pink from spring air. Elias leaned on the fence, watching. When Clara looked up, he tipped his hat. It was a small gesture, but she felt it like sunlight after months of shadow. And then, soft, uncertain, like the breaking of ice, Lila's voice rose through the noise. A single word, fragile and perfect. Pa. The world seemed to hold its breath. Elias froze, eyes wide, then knelt as she ran to him. He caught her mid-stride, lifting her into his arms. Laughter and tears tangled together. Clara covered her mouth, her heart breaking open in the gentlest way. Later, when the day grew quiet, the three of them stood by the gate watching the sun bleed across the plains. The light was soft, the air smelled of thawing earth, and the snow melted into rivulets that sang their way down to the creek. Somewhere, a voice, the old narrator's voice, rose, tender as wind through grass. Love out here never shouted. It whispered in small mercies in hands that stayed when others fled. It mended, it forgave, it waited. Clara leaned against Elias, Lila asleep in her arms. The last of the snow glowed pink in the dying sun. "And if you felt that warmth in your chest, friend," the voice murmured, "maybe hit that subscribe button and stay a while in these Wild West tales."